Hello, and welcome to the Sacred Heart Shaman podcast, where we talk about spiritual healing, shamanic wisdom, and the challenges of walking the healer's path. My name is Nadia Harenkiu, and today is episode number 33, Beyond the Veil, my QHHT journeys, past lives, and galactic truths. Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the podcast today. We are going to be talking about the QHHT methods, which is Quantum Healing and Hypnosis Technique developed by Dolores Cannon. It is a technique for past life regression and having conversations with the higher self. This is a training that I recently went through to get certified to conduct QHHT experiences. And so far, my experience has been amazing. And so I wanted to share it with the podcast. So going back historically, my first spiritual awakening actually happened right after I read Michael Newton's books, which was Journey of Souls and uh, something similar to that. I can remember Journey of Souls, and it was about life between lives. He was a hypnotherapist, I believe, and started stumbling upon information that was outside of the realm of hypnotherapy and went on to write several books about it. And then I read the books by Brian Weiss. I believe one of those is Many Souls, Many Masters. And I remember reading these books so many years ago and feeling something stir deep inside my soul. It was like I knew that the information I was reading about was true. And that was a huge catalyst moment for me on my spiritual journey. Not long after that, I had my first awakening in Hawaii, spontaneously underneath a waterfall. And I think it's interesting because now here I am, 15 years later, 13 years later, I'm not really sure, um, doing this for a living and having regression be one of the modalities that I'm training in. It's just cool when we come full circle, right? It took me this long to come back to past life regression. And my experiences with regression as a participant are actually not very good in general. I tried to have a past life regression a long time ago, just out of curiosity after reading those books, and it did not go well. I tried to work with multiple practitioners. One of the practitioners I worked with did the whole guided imagery to bring me to wherever we were going, and I had a really intense panic attack on my way down. I'm not really sure what that was about. Looking back on it now, my gut tells me that either I wasn't ready or the space was not safe that I was working in. But nevertheless, it wasn't an incredibly pleasant experience. I saw a few regressionists after that, and they all told me the same thing. It was that I couldn't be hypnotized. We're going to talk about that for just a second because it is important to the conversation. I find that there are a couple categories of people who, quote unquote, cannot be hypnotized. First are the people who are unable to let go of control. They simply cannot go to where they need to go. They are too scared to let go, or they have too much resistance. And that's fine. We all end up on that part of the journey at some point or another. And it just means that you have to work through whatever fear it is that's got a grip on the control. Not a big deal. The other part, or the other category of people who can't be hypnotized, is actually people who already live in both worlds. I do experience this with some of my clients where they have no idea that they actually have shamanic tendencies and they can live in both worlds, meaning this world and the other world at the same time. And so being hypnotized, quote unquote hypnotized, is not going to come across the same way. They're going to seem like they're not hypnotized, but actually they're just extremely gifted and they already have the ability to enter that state relatively naturally. And so I do find a lot of people who walk away from hypnosis or regression thinking there's something wrong with them and they can't be hypnotized when in fact they are actually quite gifted and they just need someone to recognize it so that they can work with them on that level. So let's talk about past lives for a second. What is a past life? I have many beliefs about this. All of them are conflicting. and also not conflicting at all. Past lives, to me, in my experience, are not a black and white concept. It's not, these are the lifetimes that Nadia lived, period. I have never experienced that to be true for myself or for my clients. Past lives are a combination of many things, and taking it outside of the box in which we're putting it in is super important to understand the concept of regression and hypnosis. So, past lives are a collective experience. So, everybody has an experience in a past life. All of those experiences are shared, all of those experiences are linked, and all of them can be tapped into. You have lifetimes that you have as an individual experienced on this plane and other planes and other dimensions and other planets as an individual. We also have metaphor. Sometimes our past life experiences are actually metaphors, and they are something that we need to experience in order to get the medicine we need in this life right now. So maybe we didn't actually live the life of a queen in Egypt in this time. And it's interesting because a lot of people have very similar past lives, like being certain royalty, being certain gods. Those are shared collective experiences. And sometimes we need to have that experience in a past life regression in order to get the medicine that we need in that moment. We have alternate timelines. So there is an infinite number of timelines, I think, if you want to call them timelines. There's infinite possibilities. And sometimes we are taken to alternate timelines, again, to have a specific experience that we need right now in real time. Sometimes there's something we need to see. So to understand how something works, how something turned out the way that it did, a certain collective experience, sometimes we need to be a witness, not necessarily that we actually lived during that time. And I also have to ask the question, like, does it matter? Does it matter what past lives are specifically? I say no. We have the experiences we have for a reason. Trust that and experience it as if it's yours, no matter what. And then also leave room for flexibility. So don't hang on to anything too tightly in this work, basically. I'm going to share a few of my experiences with QHHT. So if you've never heard of Dolores Cannon, she's a pretty high-level person. She does past life regression and then conversations with the higher self, focusing on quantum healing or bringing healing messages and energy from the other side or the other places that we navigate to, as well as bringing someone through regressions. Now, through her training, I have found that her induction, the words that she uses to bring someone to the place they need to go to, is very specific and very powerful and very unique. I've been doing different types of regression for a number of years, kind of on the fly on my own. And once I started using her methods, the flavor of my sessions changed dramatically and they got very deep and very far. So it's pretty special. She has a number of books that are very interesting, also very dense if you want to get into the world of like bigger picture, collective stuff, extraterrestrial stuff, why things happened, as well as a number of stories from her past life regression clients. So I'm going to say that about Dolores Cannon. Super interesting individual who is now passed away. And now I'm going to tell you some stories so that you can get an understanding of how cool and profound the QHHT sessions can be. So first I'm going to talk about my experience with it. The first time I went into a QHHT session, it felt like a very deep hypnotic state. Like I was in the room, but I was not in the room, and I felt both of those things. Like I was laying on my couch, but also like I was in the forest. It was a very surreal experience. It is an experience that I do have on a semi-regular basis, doing kind of trance work and deep meditation. And it was really awesome to have someone holding space because they could direct me and I didn't have to think about it. So that was really powerful. Now, in this first lifetime, I experienced being the original shaman. Now, what I mean by that is I had an awareness that I was the only one like me on the planet and that I was there for a reason and that wherever I came from, I could not return to. Now, when I think about the earth in the past, I often thought that the veil was thinner, right? We talk about beings that are on the other side, and people have stories about how they separated this dimension from like the Fey dimension, for example. And so I assumed that the veil used to be thin. My experience in this past life was actually that the veil used to be thicker. So the doorway between our 3D reality and the reality of these other places, for example, where the Fae live, is actually quite thick and quite closed at that time. And I would say it was probably like 1600s ish, maybe 1700s. I'm not really sure, but I could feel that I was not from here and that where I belonged felt like the forest. Now, in that lifetime, I died of a broken heart. I had my children taken from me by a group of religious people who did not agree with who I was and what I did, and I didn't really know what I was doing wrong. I could see like I had these black shoes on and black dress and black hat, and everyone in the village dressed exactly the same. And there was a lot of like shame and judgment. It was very much like the vibes of pilgrims, except a little bit older than that. Like very plain, very judgmental, very much like the word of God kind of vibe, and very close knit. And I always yearned to connect with these people. I wanted to have conversations. I wanted to be friends. I wanted to be open hearted. And it was just very closed everywhere that I went. And so at one point, my children were taken from me, and I actually died of a broken heart. And when I died, made the promise to myself that I would never be that version of me again. I would never come into this world as a shaman. I would never remember that I was from the other side. So it was like I cursed myself. I made myself forget. And at the end of this whole experience, you're taken to a place where you talk to your higher self. And as I'm dialoguing with my higher self about this lifetime, it was clear I cut myself off from it so that I could find my way back. And now I can help other people find their way back when they are cut off from their spirit side, from God, from nature, from the other dimension where many of us come from, all of us come from, I guess, if we're being honest. And that I'm supposed to help people. And you can only help people if you go through it yourself first. Now, in this lifetime, I also met a man, an individual. There was a huge like heart resonance and recognition, and he was like me, and he was from the place that I was from. And I knew when I saw him again that it would signal to me that I have made it back to myself, that I've made it back to the beginning, and I've come full circle from that journey of cursing myself to forget. And that was related to the twin flame individual that I met year before last year. So my takeaway from that was that religion was bad and it was not safe to be a shaman or whatever it was that I was. I spent a lot of time in the forest, like talking to the forest and the plants and the animals and the river, and really just being separate from society. And I was punished for it. That was a very intense past life experience and really brought up a lot of really deep wounds for me that I've been carrying forever. And, you can't really heal things until you can see them. And it was a huge gift to be able to see it. My second experience was way different. And I'm going to sidestep here for a second and tell you that most people that I walk through past life regression do not have experiences like this unless they are kind of like a deeply evolved being. Like they have a really strong, big spiritual path. They're professional healers. But I'll talk about kind of the normal past lives in just a minute. So my second experience with a QHHT session as a participant, I was here on Earth to heal the planet. I almost feel like I'm a little bit at risk of sharing this out loud. I don't know, there's some hesitancy, but I also really want to. So my job was to heal the planet. I was not wanted there at that time, and I was with a group of people. We had to run from the people who lived on the planet because they were hoarding resources and they were using that control to control what was left of the population. So us being there to heal the planet was not good to them because it threatened their ability to control the masses. Now you can read into this however you'd like. Metaphor or truth. You be the one to decide. And my job was to help the planet remember. It was to help the planet remember how to grow, how to bring life back, how to bring water back, how to cause the seedlings to sprout. Now, interesting thing is I've had dreams about this lifetime on numerous occasions. So to go back and really get to experience it and feel it firsthand during this session was really freaking cool. Now, talking to the planet is one of my gifts. It is one of my abilities. I am here as a steward of Earth to open up certain portals, to activate certain things, to turn on. It's definitely not ley lines, but it's something else around the world, which is why travel is such a big part of my path and why it feels so like good and nourishing to complete. So talking to planets is my job. I think I was actually involved in the creation of planets, which really goes hand in hand with my giant self. I work a lot with giants, and they are involved in the creation of planets. So in this past life, we were literally opening up portals for these occurrences to happen. And another interesting thing that I experienced was being portaled out right before you die. So as I have explained in other podcasts, opening portals is one of my abilities. I do it naturally. I actually don't even have to try. It's simply with presence and intention that it happens. It's very interesting, very cool. And like, what do you even do with that information? So seeing it in real time, like, oh, this is what I can do with it was awesome. But the dying piece was really interesting because I do have this belief that we exit before we die. In most cases, we are ported out, and I see it in my work and I feel it all the time. Now, there are reasons why that doesn't happen. That's going to be a different podcast. But to be able to like feel, okay, there's danger coming, and watch this portal open up and all of a sudden I'm off the planet. Oh, cool. This is a thing. Another interesting part to this life was that I was immortal and got to see, feel, experience immortality. Immortality is the thing that everybody wants, right? According to, I don't know, movies and books, I suppose. And it's not something that's made up. If you want to be immortal, you have to live in the other world. You have to live in the place where there is no time. So the less structure and rigidity and control that we can have over our lives, the longer we can live, the healthier we can be, the younger we can feel. Immortality is possible. And I was shown, being 400, 500 years old, and I'm talking to the person walking me through the QHHT, and we're talking about immortality, and the answers were just coming. You have to live in the in-between space. You have to live in the feminine space, in the astral space, in the shaman space, because there's no time there. How can you age if there's no time? Now, is that possible on Earth right now as we stand? I don't know. I still have to work. I still have to pay my bills and take my dog to the veterinarian. So I don't know that no time is a thing for me or even a possibility, but it certainly is something interesting to ponder. So after I got ported out of this lifetime, I was confronted with a totally different kind of existential crisis moment. It really spun me out afterwards. That I was part of a group of individuals here to help Earth. And they had a very specific name for this group and a very specific, mission. And they were telling me this as I was sitting on top of inside of a spaceship. I'm having a conversation with a bunch of different beings. most of which were some kind of extraterrestrial that I could not even describe to you in real words. They told me the group name and what we were there to do, and I later had to verify it via the internet, and it's totally a thing. Never heard it before in my life. That was super cool. And then I got to see my true form. So, the true form of Nadia, of course, big picture, it's God, right? We're all God. We're all part of Source. We're all love. We're all connected. But middle picture between human Nadia and God Nadia, I am a giantess, like 10 feet tall, very beautiful, very lean. My hair looks a certain way. My clothing looks a certain way. That was cool. I always knew that I was part giant, but I didn't actually know what that means until I got into one of the bodies. And yeah, it was awesome. So I think that's probably one of the other reasons that I can recognize other giants or hybrid giants, because that's what I am. Well, that's part of what I am. I think it's actually much more complicated than that. So through this experience, I learned about my true form. I learned about one of my abilities and callings, why I have trouble getting on an airplane, why it's important for me to visit other lands, and a lot of insight about my soul purpose in general, as well as like this was my introduction point to extraterrestrials. This was the moment that I got genuinely attuned to that energy, and they started to come through for me in the middle of the night, in the early morning hours, downloading stuff various times a day, and also being more involved in my work with clients. So every past life experience brings you more information to help you understand how the world works and who you are and why you're here. It's so cool. And then we have the other piece of this QHHT session, which is that it's not just regression. You also get to talk to your higher self. So you'll have this past life regression experience. Typically, we do 3 past lives, depending on how deep you go or how long they are. And then you get to pour it on up and talk to your higher self and get answers to all your questions, right? That's super cool. So I would ask about, a job, about moving, about a struggle I was having with money, a certain health issue, and the answers are so clear and so straightforward most of the time. My higher self is a bit sassy, which is to be expected, I suppose. But it felt like me. Actually, the first time that we did higher self conversations, I felt my full energy trying to fit into my human body. And that's when I got the real idea or concept of how actually large I am from an energetic standpoint. I was really struggling to allow my human form to hold this energy. She didn't want to be just channeled through. She wanted to be embodied and was like inviting that in. And that was kind of my homework to work on between the first and second session. And by the time we hit the second session, I felt the voice speaking was coming like 90% from within me. So I had been able to see the difference in my own growth and my own embodiment of my higher self. That was also amazing. So, yeah, the higher self conversations are cool because most people don't get the opportunity to have those conversations in a really clean, clear environment. We have, times when information drops in, but the container that is created in these sessions just to talk to the higher self really allows for a lot of dialogue, the ability to bring in very clear questions and then have somebody like prompt you to ask clarifying questions or related questions to really unpack what it is that you need help knowing or understanding. The only other time that I have this experience with the higher self is when I'm holding a ceremony container and I get very clear information and connection to myself, but also to some kind of God presence, as well as the other beings. So there's a definite correlation, connection there. And it helps me really understand the difference between human Nadia and higher self Nadia. They approach things very differently. They have, some disagreements. And the more healing work that I do, the more the human becomes like kind of like a mask or a meat suit, and I can identify and be like, oh, there's wounded Nadia. She's making an appearance. Now, what does my higher self feel? What is she aligned with? What is truth versus what is story or fear? So that's been really helpful through these sessions. Now, I'll talk about my sessions with other people for just a moment, and I assure you I did ask permission to share this information. Everybody signs a waiver if they're okay with it before we work together. Now, the most interesting thing about facilitating these sessions is the connection between what I see as a psychic, shaman, whatever, about where these people come from and the past life experience they have. So, for example, if I have a client that I see is very connected to extraterrestrial energy, they end up having really bizarre, like disembodied, astral, weird experiences. Like, for example, someone having an experience of being like gaseous matter, like they're basically a cloud floating around and they kind of feel like wind, but then they kind of feel like energy pulsating. There is a character in Rick and Morty that I often think of when I think of this particular session, and it's like a cloud with blinking lights. It's really fascinating, and that's kind of what the person described when they were in their session. If I work with someone who is very earth based, a lot of their past lives can be quite boring, and many of them have tiny lessons. And this is like most people. I think Dolores calls it the digging potatoes lifetime, but you go through a life and nothing, like the most significant thing that happens is that you get married, or your mother dies, or your husband brings home this game that he hunted and killed. It's things that we would consider to be unimportant, and to these people in these lifetimes, they are the most important thing because they're learning lessons, like they're building blocks. I had one client who is a super magical badass, like in real life. And in her past life, she hurt a lot of people, like a lot of people. And it was not on purpose. And when it happened, she actually locked her power away so that she couldn't have access to it until she was humble enough to have it without the temptation of hurting people by accident or on purpose. And that kind of helps direct us on the healing path. Like, okay, how do we unlock this power? What still needs to be done beforehand? This is why you feel stuck. This is why you can't identify this. It's a really great modality to integrate into the rest of the work that I do. A lot of people tell me about other civilizations in different parts of the world, having experience in the desert in Egypt and Iran, Africa. Really cool to hear about those things. Even if they are boring lifetimes, it's really interesting. The fabric of time is different in some of these timelines and places. That's also very interesting to hear about. And I had one client who worked in the Akashic records, and she was like in charge of keeping track of things. Actually, I think I've had two people who were like this, working directly with higher level beings or with some kind of god and keeping track of what happened here on Earth. That was really funny. I've had people who are basically amoeba, floating around a river all the way up to royalty, priests, gods, literal gods, right hand man, right? And all of these lives have a purpose, they have lessons that they're trying to teach. And so, even if you don't believe in past lives, the experience is so deep and cathartic that you will walk away with something. You know what I mean? Like even if you don't buy into it, people don't buy into these things and they still do psychedelics and they have these big experiences that they may or may not be able to hold on to because they usually write it off to drugs. But imagine having it without taking any drugs, where you get to experience it firsthand and being able to walk away with that experience. It would change your life, whether it's true or not, or a past life or not. Just something interesting to consider if you're kind of like on the fence of doing past life regression work. So, what a wow, we're 30 minutes in. Why would you have a QHHT session? First of all, it's really cool. Second, we often have energy in other places that we can retrieve. So, whether it's energy of an ancestor, your energy, past lives, karmic events, traumatic events, different timelines, a different location of where your soul's from. If you go to those places in a past life regression session, you actually pick up your energy. You pick up whatever it is that you left behind or left locked away there, and you can bring it back with you, and you will feel a difference. It's very similar to soul retrieval, except we're going much more multidimensionally rather than primarily into the childhood. You can clear karma, which a lot of people do have. Not everybody, for sure. But if you feel like you have something holding you back from a past life or a not of this lifetime, it may be karmic, and you can resolve that through QHHT learning. As I mentioned in my sessions, I learned a lot about my origin, about extraterrestrials, about portals, about communicating with the earth, and some things that I have not shared here because I am not allowed to share. But every time I go into a regression session, it is like going to school. It is so cool. You can also release emotions and energy. So if you have had a traumatic experience, you can revisit it and fully process it. Sometimes people die traumatically. Sometimes there is a traumatic event that happened and they've been holding on to it for lifetimes and lifetimes, or maybe their grandmother has, and they're kind of like stuck and anchored in the past. And if you go back to that moment, you can release it and get unstuck. So it can affect your forward movement. And then greater understanding, like of yourself, of the world. I mean, that's something that we all want, I think, of greater understanding of how things work and why we're here. And this is a great way to do it, whether it's through the past life session or through the conversations with higher self, you will get all of those things. I think that's going to wrap it for today. So thank you for joining me to talk about quantum healing and hypnosis technique, Dolores Cannon's technique. If you are interested in diving down that hole, please contact me or look for a practitioner near you. It's a super fun activity. And thank you for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to know more about me and my work, you can find me at www.sacredheartshaman.com.